Hey everybody, and welcome to this special on Mercury going retrograde on the 18th of July until when it goes direct on the 11th of August. So I'm going to take a deep dive into what all of this means as we explore the complete emotional journey of Mercury retrograde through Cancer's waters. I'm Amani. I'm a karmic, holistic, astrological life coach, and I like to go in depth in all that I do, and all of my interpretations, especially when it comes to Venus, Mercury, Sun transits and everything really, are based on Vedic astrology, which is based on where the planets or the luminaries, which are the Sun and the Moon, are any given time in the sky. And all times are in GMT time as well. So yeah, thanks for listening. And yeah, so as Mercury enters retrograde this year, it's in the 22nd degree of Cancer, and it moves along to the 11th degree by the end. So the Sabian symbology starting in is a woman awaiting a sailboat, and then it ends when it goes direct in the 11th degree of Cancer at a clown making grimaces, and I'm going to explain what all of that means. So the body parts that these Sabian symbols rule are the gastric mucus and the gastric veins, so our digestive system basically, and the energetic frequency of this year's Mercury retrograde, and the second one for the year, is deep emotional digging, excavation with transformative communication healing. So retrograde in astrology is just when a planet appears to be moving backwards, and Mercury, our cosmic messenger, is taking a 24-day journey from hopeful anticipation, to authentic emotional expression. So that's the key theme of this retrograde, and it's not just about, the dreaded missed emails, delayed travel and all of that we all feel when Mercury's going retrograde. This retrograde is all about how we communicate our feelings and how we connect with our emotional intelligence. So Mercury and any other planet as it goes retrograde always goes into its pre-shadow phase and post-shadow phase after the retrograde period. So I'm going to explain to you what all this means now. So Mercury entered its pre-shadow building phase early July, so some of you may have been already experiencing the effects of Mercury retrograde, especially if you're born with Mercury retrograde, or you have strong Virgo energy, Gemini energy, Mercury aspects in your chart, aspects to your 4th house, 3rd house and 6th house. So you may have begun to sense shifts, changes in your emotional communication patterns, and the clown making grimaces, so funny faces, so grin and bear it sort of thing. You're not really feeling it, you don't really want to smile, but you just sort of like, doing that grimace smile that we do sometimes. We show the teeth thinly, and at this phase, Mercury was asking us to examine where we've been performing happiness rather than expressing our authentic feelings. And this early phase may have brought sort of hints about family conversations that need to be revisited, or any form of conversations, friends, lover relationship, whatever, and emotional truths that wanted to sort of like be brought out into the open and surface. Then as Mercury goes retrograde, it wants us to pause and take a deep look at our communication patterns when Mercury goes retrograde on the 18th of July at 5:45 a.m. GMT time. It's asking us to examine what we truly are waiting for in our relationships and family dynamics, the vibes that happen in them. And the gastric mucus connection suggests that our gut feelings about emotional security need serious attention. So our bodies are literally telling us to trust our instincts about nurturing and the ways that we want to be nurtured. So maybe, you may have given up on love. We've all been heartbroken or rejected. Well, a lot of us have, and this is when we start to give up on, love. But this is asking us, because Cancer is all about the home, the 4th house, but our psychological home. So to look after our internal needs, the needs of our emotions and psychological needs and our spiritual needs as well. And as Mercury, sort of like stays in retrograde for, the 24 days, just over 3 weeks it's there, going from 22 degrees to 11 degrees. It wants us to do deep emotional review work and reconnect with past emotional experiences that need healing, and think about how we express care and vulnerability. It's not just about mental processing, it's about heart level feeling, really feeling the emotions. Sometimes you may not have the words to express what you feel, but just to feel it. And I know it can be hard when all you may want to do is cry and stuff, and this is why we numb ourselves there with intoxicating substances, whether it be excessive food eating, drugs taking, alcohol, Netflix and chilling, or binging of anything. But it really wants us to examine our communication habits around emotional safety, especially the communications we have with ourselves about it. And as Mercury goes direct on the 11th of August, it wants us to, because when Mercury's retrograde, it's about thinking, right? So we don't need to act on the thoughts that we have, but as we go into, the direct period, it wants us to express our emotions more authentically. So having those honest conversations from the 11th of August onwards, if you haven't already been having them, and express your emotions authentically, even if they're not always pretty or polished, just be real with it. And the gastric vein connections can improve our emotional circulation and allow us to let our feelings flow naturally rather than holding them in our stomachs. And it wants us to stop performing and start being genuine emotional, and as Mercury stays in its post-shadow phase from the 11th of August right up until early September, it wants us to really implement our emotional discoveries, what we find out about our thoughts and our true need of nurturing and how we like to nurture others. And it wants us to integrate them into our daily communications, habits and lives and thought patterns, where we, come out of the other end, expressing our feelings and needs more clearly and honestly. So yeah, that's sort of like the summary version. Yeah, now I'm going to go in depth and look at it in every aspect. So overall, as I said, Mercury retrograde through Cancer represents a deep invitation to revolutionize how we communicate our deepest emotional needs and family dynamic vibes, and it wants us to change our communication style, especially in the realms, the areas of feeling, intuition and nurturing. And the real question it wants us to ask is, have you been communicating from habit rather than from your heart? Have you been really communicating what you really think and feel? So the positives of this is that it really puts a spotlight on emotional healing through authentic communication, and it's given us that rare opportunity to revisit family and other conversations that need a resolution, a conclusion, and express feelings we have been suppressing and holding in, and develop more intuitive ways of connecting with others. So the movement from the Sabian symbol, where Mercury is when it goes retrograde, away in a sailboat, to making grimaces, symbolizes moving from passive hold to active, emotional, authentic expression, which is not conventionally attractive, but it's what we need to do, right? And it wants us to, really go deep into our emotional intelligence development, start it or continue it. And this can heal generational communication patterns within families, but negatively, because, a lot of people don't like truth, especially family's truths, right? There can be family dramas, oversensitivity in communication, and the temptation to retreat into emotional cells rather than expressing our needs clearly. And we can find ourselves crying over spilt milk more than usual, or taking casual comments far too personally, and the gastric connection, so how we could literally feel communication stress in our stomachs, experiencing digestive issues when emotional conversations go off centered and get twisted and the meaning goes all over the place. So it's really important to say what you mean, give people space and grace, but practice active listening, but enforce your boundaries and respect other people's boundaries. And for some of you, when things get heated, it's just best to walk away rather than say things you don't mean. But sometimes we need to say those things, you know, so the air can really get out there and the air can be cleared. And that's why they say the truth hurts, because it often does, you know. But sometimes we need to go through the pain to get to the better days, especially in our relationships. So the best use of this energy is to journal about your emotional patterns, practice vulnerable communication with people you trust and especially yourself. It's a brilliant time and energy to start or continue therapy, family healing, and developing more authentic ways of expressing care and concern rather than avoiding complex, hard emotional topics. Lean into them with curiosity and compassion. So how we can practically integrate the energies that's wanting us to tap into our feelings is maybe start each day while Mercury's in retrograde by checking in with your emotional weather, you know, asking yourself how are you feeling and how do you want to communicate those feelings. Practice saying I feel statements rather than I think when discussing personal matters. Keep a journal specifically for family dynamic vibes and emotional patterns you're noticing. And when you feel that familiar stomach tightness during conversations, pause and ask yourself what emotions wants to be expressed authentically. So the energies that are involved at the time of this Mercury retrograde, Mercury rules communication, thinking patterns, daily interactions, relationships and information processing. So conversations with neighbours or anyone you see day to day, people at work, etc, lovers, friends, family members, so for some of you. And as the rule of Gemini and Virgo, Mercury brings analytical accuracy, care, and adaptable, flexible communication skills. In Cancer, Mercury's usual logical approach gets infused with emotional intelligence and intuitive understanding. And this combination creates communication that's both thoughtful and heartfelt. So, you know, and Cancer energy is all about emotional security, family bonds, relationships, nurturing instincts and protective care, and it's ruled by the moon. So Cancer brings cynical, intuitive and deeply feeling energy to whatever it touches. And when Mercury travels through Cancer, our communications becomes more protective, emotionally aware and family focused. So ultimately it supports conversations that build emotional bridges rather than intellectual arguments, and it's asking us to slow down our usual mental chatter and superficial conversations and tune into our emotional wisdom instead and deep conversations with others. It's powerful for healing family and other communication patterns and developing more empathetic ways of expressing your needs and boundaries to yourself and others and being in touch with your feelings, you know. It creates a perfect storm for emotional communication and healing. And the retrograde motion makes sure that we don't rush through this emotional processing. We need to take the time to truly understand our feeling patterns before moving forward with new communication styles. So in terms of the real world uses, it wants us to develop, as I said, more authentic ways of expressing our feelings and needs. And negatively, it can lead to emotional stress because of the need to be authentic in expressing our feelings and needs and building our emotional intelligence. This can lead to family and other dramas and oversensitive communication and us taking things too personally, getting defensive, and a confusion between authentic emotional expression and emotional dumping on others. So make sure you protect your boundaries and respect other people's as well. In terms of the financial consequences, we can make more intuitive financial decisions based on emotional needs rather than just logical analysis. It's a great time for family financial planning and rethinking your budgets and stuff like that, creating a budget, becoming more aware of how you emotionally spend, and it allows you to make money decisions that support long-term emotional well-being, and it may bring insights about emotional relationships relationships with money and security, but negatively, emotional spending during the retrograde period can lead to family financial disagreements due to communication, misunderstandings, and a tendency to make financial decisions based on temporary emotional states rather than practical considerations. And because of this, you can experience delays in family-related financial matters or property decisions. Politically, it can increase our emotional intelligence, and political conversations can become better because we can have a greater understanding of how political decisions affect families and emotional security. There can be an increased empathy amongst political leaders and their discussions, giving a potential to heal political divisions, the difference between Conservatives and Labour in the UK, and Liberals and Republicans in the States and stuff like that. Negatively, there can be overly emotional political reactions. Family political arguments become more personal and hurtful. Difficulty separating emotional responses from political analysis, and the tendency for political communications to become more manipulative or guilt-based rather than factual. On the materialistic, social, collective level, we can collectively just be moving towards more authentic emotional expression. While this is the best use of this energy, we don't always do the best things with astrological or any other energy. So it can increase our awareness of our family and community needs. We can have better collective emotional intelligence, and it allows us to heal social communication patterns that have been superficial or harmful, but negative. There can be a lot of overwhelming communication, especially with social media and the internet in general. There can be a collective tendency towards emotional manipulation in communications, increased social sensitivity leading to misunderstandings, and a potential for social movements to become more emotionally reactive rather than strategically thoughtful. Psychologically, in terms of the psychological consequences, positively it can provide breakthrough insights about our family communication patterns, healing of childhood emotional expression and other wounds, and development of healthy emotional boundaries, improved emotional vocabulary and expression skills, and the integration of the feminine, nurturing types of communication styles. So we can just be more empathetic, slow down, listen more, and react more compassionate. Negatively, we can go back, regress to our childhood emotional patterns during times of stress. There can be a tendency to psychoanalyze others' communications excessively. There can be emotional frustration with, or fusion with family members' feelings, and this can make it difficult for us to maintain psychological boundaries during emotionally charged conversations, because we may lean into other people's energy or react to it and make things worse instead of better, so just watch out for that. In terms of the esoteric consequences, it allows us to heal generational communication patterns, increases our psychic sensitivity and intuitive communication abilities, connected to lunar and feminine spiritual traditions and energy, moon energy, fourth house energy, right? And it allows us to develop our emotional healing skills, but negatively we can feel emotionally overwhelmed from psychic sensitivity. So as I said, we can absorb other people's emotional states unconsciously, and there can be confusion between intuitive guidance and emotional reactivity, and we can emotionally spiritual bypass or use spirituality to avoid practical communication responsibilities, like, well, I'm just speaking my truth and I don't care about yours or your feelings or reactions sort of talk, so being insensitive or using spirituality spirituality to gaslight others in conversation. On the symbolic, emotional, creative level, it allows for creative expression of emotional themes, healing through creative communication, and increased ability to create emotionally resonant work, work that hits people and hits you on the emotional level. We can feel more connected to water as well, and we can just have more sort of intuitive guidance when we are creating as well. But negatively, creative blocks can happen due to us feeling overwhelmed with emotions. We can create from emotional wounds rather than emotional wisdom, and using our art to hurt others. There can be difficulty completing creative projects due to emotional perfectionism, and creative expression can become too personal or therapeutic rather than universal. So yeah. Now I'm just going to talk about the aspects that Mercury is making as it, goes retrograde and then direct on the 11th of August. So Mercury makes a sextile to Venus. So this brings harmony between our relationship values and emotional communication. So it supports healing conversations with loved ones, so counteracting those negative effects of family drama and abusive communication as well. It allows us to express our feelings creatively and find beautiful ways to express difficult and challenging emotions. It's great energy to heal any problems in intimate romantic relationships, and it allows us to revisit family discussions about love and values. So it's really a nice energy, this sextile between Venus helping us heal. But negatively, because Venus likes to sometimes beautify everything, we may avoid difficult conversations by focusing only on pleasant topics and topics that are not hard and superficial. There can be a tendency to sugarcoat important emotional truths and not be direct to maintain harmony, and the risk of prioritizing relationship peace over authentic emotional expression. Mercury also makes a sextile square to Saturn, so this supports serious family conversations. It brings changes in our routine and responsibility to our emotional communications. It allows us to be serious about our family conversations, taking responsibility for our past communication mistakes. So it's a good energy to say sorry with, and it allows us to develop mature emotional expression skills, because we've got Saturn here, right, and Saturn's in retrograde as well, so it's already inward, so it allows us to, really work on that emotional healing, and it really supports us doing that shadow work and continuing or starting therapy as well. But negatively, it can add to communications feeling heavy, restricted, limited, and we can be more pessimistic about family and other conversations, and we can just have a difficulty expressing love and affection and warm feelings due to fear of being vulnerable. And there's a potential for authority figures to suppress, get in the way of authentic emotional expression. So there may be a parent or a lover or someone in your friendship group or family, who's like, no, we can't talk about this, and this can get in the way of you being true to yourself. Mercury also makes a sextile square to Neptune, and this allows us, supports us with our intuitive and psychic communication abilities and being compassionate and empathetic, and it allows us to be understanding in our family relationships, because remember, Cancer rules the 4th house, where the moon does, but Cancer lives in the 4th house, so it's everything connected to home, legacy, the feminine energy. So again, it supports us creatively expressing our feelings, meditating on our communication patterns, and developing empathetic listening skills. But negatively, it can add to the emotional manipulation or guilt tripping, and people getting emotional in conversations, and it can add to us finding it hard to tell the difference between intuition and wishful thinking in relationships, and family secrets or deceptions can come out, during this time as well. Mercury also makes a biquintal to the North Node, so this is nice sort of energy. So it allows us to take fresh new approaches in our family communication patterns, helping us to develop, family healing and for us to not be afraid to show off or use our natural emotional expression gifts, and it supports karmic healing through authentic emotional conversation. So it is a sort of energy by quintiles work inwards, but Mercury retrograde is inwards. This works nicely with this retrograde, but negatively it can add or create family misunderstandings, a tendency to overthink the spiritual significance of communication patterns, and a difficulty integrating creative communication insights into practical interactions, right? So those were the aspects for when Mercury goes retrograde, and this is the aspects that are influencing Mercury direct right up until it leaves its shadow period in the second week of September. So yeah, as Mercury goes direct on the 11th of August, it brings decisive action to emotional communications, the courage to express our feelings that we have been suppressing, holding in, and this allows for the energetic follow through on family healing conversations. It also supports assertive but caring emotional expression and taking the initiative in relationship communications as Mercury goes direct, and it wants us to start implementing the things that we thought about doing in the retrograde period. Although, as I said, some of you may, start implementing things while Mercury's retrograde, but negatively it adds to the risk of emotional conversations becoming too aggressive or rush, and the tendency to force emotional discussions on others before they're ready, and the potential for family arguments to escalate during Mercury direct. And this energy is Mercury being direct lasts right up until actually Mercury goes retrograde again, which I think happens in November, December this year, which will be the final retrograde of this year. Mercury makes a trine to Neptune, so this is beautiful flowing energy between emotional communication and spiritual compassion. It supports intuitive understanding in family relationships, compassionate listening, and expressing emotions through creative or spiritual means, and it allows us to forgive conversations and just be more open to healing things. Negatively adds to us sort of like becoming over emotional, avoiding the practical aspects of family problems, and being unrealistic and idealistic as well about how much a family member can change, and it can there's a risk of emotional discussions losing focus or direction. But positively, it brings transformative power to emotional communications. It supports conversations that reveal hidden family truths. It helps express emotions with authentic intensity. It's an excellent energy for therapy work and deep psychological communication healing. But negatively, there's a risk of emotional conversations becoming too intense or confrontational, and there's a tendency for emotional conversations to become manipulative or controlling as well. So now I'm just going to go in depth and talk more about all the Sabian symbols that are influencing this Mercury retrograde and Mercury going direct. So the first one is Mercury at the 22nd degree of Cancer, a woman awaiting a sailboat, and I talked about this in the introduction. And in summary, it's about patiently nurturing hope while trusting life's timing, and it wants us to wait on deep emotional trust. Sometimes we're like, I can't be bothered with this emotional work, it's too long. This symbol highlights the importance of waiting and importance, and it connects to the gastric mucus, so the protective lining of our stomach that seals us from digestive acids while allowing nourishment to be absorbed. The sailboat represents something desired that requires both wind, external forces, and water, emotional currents inside internal feelings to arrive. And Mercury's influence here brings thoughtful consideration to this waiting period, making it an active, conscious choice rather than passive resignation. And from a Jungian perspective, this symbol represents the Mima's patient wisdom, the feminine principle that knows when to wait and when to act, and the woman symbolises the archetypal logical, wise mother who understands natural timing and cycles. Mercury here shows our conscious mind is learning to work with emotional rhythms rather than forcing logical timelines and saying, I must be healed now, and setting into it may take me a lifetime to heal, it may take me lifetimes to heal, but I can do the day-to-day work that is needed to get there, right? So, positively, it reminds us of emotional wisdom, intuitive timing. It allows us to have increased patience while communicating. It supports the ability to nurture hope during uncertain periods and trust in life cycles and nature and emotional processes. It helps us with building emotional resilience through mindful waiting and shadow work, and allows us to create space for organic emotional developments rather than forcing them. Negatively, passive waiting that avoids taking the necessary action. It can add to the anxiety about things beyond personal control. There can be a tendency to idealize future outcomes rather than engaging with present reality. It can create emotional dependency on external circumstances for happiness. There can be stomach tension from worried anticipation. On the esoteric level, it connects to our understanding of the sacred nature of gestation periods and emotional growth, the ability to receive intuitive guidance during transitional phases, and really understanding that emotional development and growth comes in stages. It allows us to recognize that some gifts come through developing patience. It allows us to trust in divine timing and universal support systems. Negatively, we can spiritual bypass through excessive passivity, not doing anything, just thinking that everything's just going to be provided without actually doing the inner work, shadow work, or any work. Avoiding personal responsibility by waiting for external salvation. Misunderstanding surrender as inaction rather than conscious alignment. A fear of taking initiative in spiritual or emotional matters. A disconnection from personal agency and empowerment. In terms of the health influences on the emotional level, it allows us to develop emotional patience and resilience, but negatively it can add to anxiety and worry and emotional stagnation, not staying the same, not getting out of our emotional comfort zones. Due to waiting too much, we have to find the balance between being patient but taking action as well. In terms of spiritual health, it supports trust in divine timing and spiritual surrender, but negatively can create spiritual dependency or avoidance of personal spiritual responsibility. In terms of physical health, it reminds us of, the stomach problems that can come from anxiety and worry, but it also gives us the energy to do exercises, change our diet to help with any digestive or immune issues we have. In terms of psychological health, it encourages healthy emotional boundaries and patience, but it may also manifest as learned helplessness or external locus of control. In terms of the practical well-being, real world uses, it wants us to practice mindful waiting through meditation and journaling, create supportive routines during uncertain periods, develop trust exercises and gratitude practices, work with stomach soothing herbs and gentle nutrition during times of emotional waiting. It wants us to focus on eating nourishing foods that don't irritate the stomach lining, avoiding spicy or acidic foods during emotional turbulent times, practice stress reduction techniques like deep breathing to prevent stomach acid from increasing due to anxiety, consider probiotics to support healthy gut bacteria during emotional processing periods, and ultimately it brings conscious awareness to our emotional waiting periods, teaching us to communicate and rest in uncertainty and with wisdom rather than anxiety, and it just really homes in on the importance of patience, especially in transitional periods. When Mercury goes direct, it's in the 11th degree of Cancer, as I said, and this is a clown making grimaces, and this rules the gastric veins, and it wants us to have emotional expression even when it's not pretty. So it wants us to express ourselves in ways that doesn't conform to social expectations of beauty or appropriateness. The gastric veins represent circulation and flow with our emotional centre, how feelings move through our system rather than getting stuck. And Mercury's influence here brings conscious choice to emotional expression, even when these expressions may seem exaggerated or unconventional. Psychologically, it represents the shadow integration aspect of Jungian psychology, the willingness to show less attractive emotional states rather than maintaining a false persona or personas. And the clown archetype represents the wise fool who speaks truth through apparent foolishness, using exaggerated expression to reveal authentic human experience. So positively, as Mercury goes direct, it gives us the courage to express authentic emotions regardless of social approval, healing through honest emotional communication, using humour and exaggeration to process complicated feelings, breaking free from emotional perfectionism and people pleasing, developing genuine emotional resilience through authentic expression. Negatively, it can lead to emotional manipulation through dramatic displays, attention-seeking behaviour that masks genuine needs, using humour to avoid serious emotional processing, inappropriate emotional expressions that damage relationships, confusion between authentic expression and emotional dumping. In terms of the esoteric, occult, hidden meanings, the sacred clown, it reminds us of the sacred clown tradition of speaking truth through apparent foolishness, understanding that spiritual growth requires authenticity over appearance, recognition that emotional healing often looks messy before it looks beautiful, gives us the ability to transform pain into wisdom through expressive arts. It allows us to connect to shamanic traditions of healing through authentic emotional release. Negatively, spiritual materialism through dramatic emotional displays, avoiding deeper spiritual work by staying in emotional drama, misusing emotional authenticity as an excuse for harmful behaviour, confusing ego expression with soul expression, using spiritual concepts to justify emotional immaturity. In terms of the health influences, it wants us to practice emotional honesty and authentic expression, but it can manifest as emotional volatility or attention-seeking behaviour. It supports authentic spiritual expression and shadow work on the spiritual level, but it can create spiritual drama or emotional spiritual bypassing negatively. In terms of our physical health, the gastric veins connection helps us with improved emotional circulation, but it can lead to circulation problems from emotional extremes on the negative end. Psychologically, it encourages healthy emotional expression, reduces psychological splitting. Positively, but negatively, it can manifest as borderline traits or emotional dysregulation. So, the best use of this energy is to practice emotional honesty in safe relationships in terms of, the practical real world uses of this Sabian degree, develop healthy outlets for intense emotions through creative expression rather than suppressing them. It wants us, in terms of body care, focus on improving circulation through gentle movement and warm, nourishing foods, avoid emotional eating or drinking during intense emotional expression periods. It supports healthy blood flow with circulation in touching herbs like ginger or hawthorn, and it wants us to practice emotional release techniques that support rather than strain the digestive system, and ultimately it reminds us to make a conscious choice to authentically express our emotions, have honest communication about our feelings, and sort of like just building on that genuine connection. Venus is in the 21st degree of Taurus, and the Sabian symbology for this is moving finger points to significant passages in the book. So this allows us to go out there. It wants us to deliberately pay attention to meaningful knowledge, and it wants us to make a choice in what we are willing to absorb and share, and it wants us to also take some time out to appreciate ourselves and to love ourselves and others, and to pay attention to knowledge that serves beauty, harmony and practical value. From a Jungian perspective, this represents the wise librarian archetype, the part of the psyche that knows which knowledge is worth preserving, holding on to and sharing, and what we need to let go of. Saturn and Neptune are in the 8th degree of Pisces, and the tagline for Saturn in the 8th degree of Pisces is standing firm while sounding the call for transformation, and Neptune here, the tagline is divine inspiration, calls for grounded spiritual action, and the Sabian symbol is a girl blowing a bugle. So this is wanting us to imagine a young feminine figure making a clear, penetrating sound that carries across distances, because the bugle is like a saxophone trumpet. And the left talus, ankle bone, represents our foundation, our daily habits, our structure, our routine, and our ability to move forward past our past pain, especially our past emotional pain. And the bugle represents a clear communication that serves a greater purpose. So it's paying attention to having discipline, to bring structure and routine to our emotional processing. And Neptune here allows us to be more compassionate and inspired here. This symbol represents the archetypal messenger who bridges different realms, the spiritual and the material. The girl represents innocence, clarity. The bugle represents purposeful communication, and the combination shows messages that serve collective awakening. So Saturn, at the time of this Mercury Retrograde direct period, is wanting us to take responsibility for our healing journey, and Neptune adds the universal compassion and divine inspiration, allowing us to follow through and to, love and respect ourselves and others, and take time out to nurture the things that need nurturing during this time. So now I'm going to talk about the karmic meanings and lessons. So positively, this transit teaches us to communicate with emotional wisdom rather than reactive patterns inherited from family systems. It wants us to learn to express authentic feelings while maintaining healthy boundaries and developing the courage to have conversations that heal rather than wound and hurt ourselves and others. The karmic gift is emotional communication mastery that can heal generational patterns, but negatively, we may face repeated family communication patterns that have caused pain across generations, and it can give us the tendency to use emotional expression as manipulation rather than authentic sharing, and we can just have a difficulty balancing emotional honesty with emotional responsibility. So in terms of the karmic advice, it wants us to approach family conversations with curiosity rather than judgment, practice expressing emotions as information rather than demands. Remember that healing family communication patterns requires patience and persistence, gentle effort rather than dramatic confrontations. In terms of the past life memories or dreams that can come up, dreams or memories of being an emotional healer, wise woman or family mediator in past lives may surface. You may recall lifetimes where emotional wisdom was valued and authentic expression was welcomed. Healing memories of nurturing family environments or communities that supported emotional growth. Negatively, past life memories of emotional suppression, holding things in, family secrets or communication being used as a weapon rather than a bridge may come up. Dreams of drowning in family emotions or being punished for authentic emotional expression could come up as well. Point of all of these things coming up is that they want you to heal them rather than run away from them. The best use of this energy karmically, with the dreams or memories that may come up, is using them as information rather than literal truth. Sometimes for some of you there may be literal truth, but nevertheless they're giving you insight on what needs to be healed for you at this time. Focus on what healing qualities you can develop now rather than dwelling on the past pain, and practice grounding grounding techniques when past life material feels overwhelming. In terms of the collective karmic consequences, it supports collective healing of family trauma, increased emotional intelligence in public conversation and social settings, and it wants us to move towards more authentic, heart-centered communication in our communities, on or offline, and society may develop better support systems for emotional expression and family healing. Negatively, there can be a risk of collective emotional overwhelm, family and community divisions, problems, separation can happen, and people can be more emotionally charged, like my way is the right way, I don't want to hear it, that sort of thing, escalating the risks of drama, and public communications can become more manipulative or guilt-based rather than factual and compassionate. So it wants us to support initiatives that promote healthy emotional expression and family healing, practice emotional communication skills in small, safe groups before attempting larger community healing work, and remember that collective emotional healing happens through individual emotional responsibility. So putting a spotlight on how important it is for us to each take responsibility to heal the things within ourselves that need healing. So now I'm just going to talk about how it influences relationships a bit more. So as I said, in terms of family relationships, it can increase our emotional understanding between family members and establish healthier communication patterns as we heal old family wounds and have a deeper appreciation for family emotional bonds and history. But negatively, the family dramas can just keep on coming up, and people can be oversensitive to secrets and lies and deception that can come out now. There can be a tendency to regress to childhood emotional patterns and a difficulty maintaining adult boundaries during emotional family conversations. So it's just, as I said, best to approach family conversations with curiosity rather than expectation. Practice speaking from your adult self rather than your inner child. Set clear emotional boundaries before taking part in family conversations. Some of you may write notes down or voice record them, secretly have an earbud in while you're playing what you need to say, or listen to relaxing music to make sure you don't, act aggressive or, act a bit wild, act mad, but in the crazy, like, my way's the right way, it's the way, just going off on one, as we say in the UK. In terms of friendships can become more emotionally honest and supportive, providing an opportunity to heal friendships, communication patterns. There can be deeper emotional bonding through authentic serving, and friends can become our chosen family through emotional intimacy. Negatively, we can take friends' communications too personally right now, expecting friends to provide family level emotional support, but some of our friends are our family, but we can just project our past pain to deal with our family or old friendships onto our current friendships, and friendship boundaries can become unclear due to this emotional intensity. So it's important to communicate your emotional needs clearly rather than expect friends to read your mind. Respect that friends may process emotions differently from family members. Create a separate time for emotional processing rather than making every friendship interaction about emotional support. In terms of co-worker relationships, we can become more empathetic. In our workplace communication, we can have a better understanding of co-workers' emotional needs and motivations. It gives us the opportunity to create more supportive team dynamic and vibes, and workplace conversations can become more authentic and caring. Negatively, workplace boundaries can become unclear due to emotional serving. We can take work communications too personally, bringing family emotional patterns into professional relationships, and there can be a difficulty separating personal emotions from workplace relationships. So it's important to maintain professional boundaries while being emotionally intelligent. Practice separating your emotional reactions from workplace feedback. Create clear distinctions between personal emotional support and professional collaboration. In terms of committed couples, it can lead to deeper emotional intimacy through authentic communication, a healing of relationship communication patterns. In increase emotional empathy and understanding, and an opportunity to create, what vibe dynamic you have within your partnership. Negatively, emotional conversations can become too intense or overwhelming. We can project family patterns onto our partner. We can have a difficulty maintaining individual emotional identity within the relationship, and partner relationships can become too emotionally enmeshed, codependent rather than interdependent as well. So it's important to practice expressing emotions as information rather than demands, maintaining individual emotional identity while building emotional intimacy. Create regular check-ins for emotional communication rather than waiting for crisis moments. In terms of hookup relationships, there's a need for more honest communication about emotional expectations. It gives the opportunity to practice authentic emotional expression in lower state relationships, and allows for a clearer understanding of what emotional connection means to you personally. Negatively, we can confuse casual connections with family level emotional intimacy. We can expect casual partners to provide emotional healing or support, and we can have a difficulty maintaining appropriate emotional boundaries in casual connections. So it's important to be clear about emotional expectations and boundaries from the beginning. Use hookups, casual connections to practice healthy emotional communication skills rather than seeking deep emotional healing. Maintain other sources of emotional support outside of casual hookup relationships. In terms of singles and self-partnered individuals, it's an opportunity to heal family communication patterns independently, developing authentic emotional expression skills, creating chosen family through friend and community connections, and becoming your own source of emotional nurturing and support. Negatively, we can feel isolated during emotional processing periods. There can be a tendency to overanalyze family communication patterns without taking in an outside perspective. There can be difficulty testing new emotional communication skills without regular intimate relationships. It's best to create regular opportunities for emotional expression and sharing with trusted friends or therapists. Practice self-compassion during emotional processing periods. Seek community connections that provide opportunities for authentic emotional communication. In terms of how it affects our career development, it can increase emotional intelligence in our professional communications, giving us the ability to create more nurturing and supportive work environments. Career opportunities can be a good base to use our emotional communication skills, and we can be more in tune with leadership approaches that balance authority with empathy. Negatively, there can be difficulty maintaining professional boundaries during emotional periods, a tendency to take work feedback too personally, bringing family emotional patterns into professional relationships, and career decisions can be based on temporary emotional states rather than long-term goals. It's important to develop professional emotional intelligence skills through training or coaching or reading a book, watching videos, listening to podcasts, stuff like that. Self-learning is just as valuable. Practice separating personal emotional reactions from work feedback. Consider career paths that value emotional intelligence and communication skills. In terms of your personal development, it allows for deep healing of emotional communication patterns, development of authentic emotional expression skills, increase emotional self-awareness and intelligence, and healing of family of origin communication wounds. Negatively, it can add to emotional feeling of overwhelm during processing periods. There can be a tendency to regress to earlier emotional development stages and difficulty integrating new emotional communication skills into daily life, and confusion between emotional authenticity and emotional dumping. So it's best to engage in practices that allows you to work on communication patterns and practice new communication skills in safe spaces before using them in challenging situations, and develop emotional regulation and communication skills, as well as communication expression skills. In terms of spiritual development, it wants us to connect to the feminine and lunar spiritual traditions. It allows us to be more intuitive and psychic in our communication. It reminds us of spiritual healing through emotional authenticity and the development of compassionate communication practices. Negatively, spiritual bypassing through excessive emotional expression, confusion between emotional reactivity and spiritual guidance, and the tendency to use spirituality to avoid practical communication responsibilities as well. And there can just be overwhelming feelings due to increased psychic and intuitive sensitivity. So it's important to balance emotional expression with emotional regulation practices, develop discernment between emotional reactivity and intuitive guidance, create grounding practices to support increased emotional and psychic sensitivity. In terms of educational development, learning approaches that integrate emotional intelligence with intellectual knowledge, educational opportunities that are focused on communication, psychology and family systems, and learning environments that support emotional expression and authenticity. Negatively, there can be a difficulty concentrating on studies during emotional processing periods, a tendency to personalize educational feedback or criticism. Learning environments can feel emotionally unsafe or unsupportive, and confusion between emotional learning and intellectual learning can happen as well. So it's best to look for learning environments that value emotional intelligence alongside intellectual development. Practice receiving feedback as information rather than personal criticism. Create emotional support systems during intensive learning periods also. In terms of self-partner development, develop internal emotional communication skills, healing relationships with family voices and patterns, creating internal emotional security and nurturing, and become emotionally self-sufficient while remaining open to connection. But we can also experience isolation during emotional processing, and this can lead to echo chambers, just going round and round in circles. We can have a difficulty testing new emotional communication skills without regular intimate relationships, and the tendency towards emotional self-assessment rather than self-awareness. So it's important to create regular opportunities for emotional expression and feedback with trusted friends or professionals. Practice self-compassion and internal emotional nurturing, and balance self-focus with community, connection and contribution. So now I'm just going to wrap up with the best activities to do for different types of people, as well as give some questions that can help you with your self-reflection during this time, and then conclude. So for creatives, it's a great time to express emotions through art, writing or performance that focuses on family themes, childhood memories or authentic emotional states. Create work that expresses the full range of human emotions rather than just beautiful or acceptable feelings. Use this transit to break free from people pleasing on the creative level, and create work that expresses your authentic emotional truth. Focus on water element creativity, painting with watercolors, writing about poetry about emotions, or creating music that captures feeling rather than melody. Professionals, focus on emotional intelligence, communication skills or family systems understanding. Consider training in counselling, meditation or other people focused professional skills. Bring more emotional intelligence to professional communications while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Practice expressing disagreement or difficult feedback with empathy and care. Consider how your work can serve emotional healing or family support in some way. Entrepreneurs, business development that focuses on serving families, especially their emotional health and communication improvement, can do well. Consider ventures that combine practical services with emotional intelligence or family support. Make decisions in your business that align with your emotional values and family priorities rather than just financial outcomes. Practice authentic communication with clients and business partners. Consider how your business can contribute to community health, especially on the emotional level. For alternative healers, consider deepening or starting to specialize in family systems healing or emotional communication therapy, or techniques that work with the water element and the emotional body. Focus on healing approaches that confront generational patterns and family communication dynamics. For lovers, emotional intimacy practices that focus on authentic expression can be really good right now, and family pattern awareness and creating chosen family dynamics within your relationship. Practice vulnerable communication and emotional empathy building. Use this transit to deepen emotional intimacy through authentic communication rather than just physical or romantic expression. Practice expressing difficult emotions with love and care. Work together in healing family communication patterns that affect your relationship. For those who are single and self-partnered, think about emotional self-care practices. Think about chosen family building through community connections and healing work focused on family communication patterns. Consider therapy support groups or community activities that offer emotional connection and growth opportunities. Focus on becoming emotionally self-sufficient while remaining open to connection. Practice emotional communication skills with friends and community members. Create nurturing routines and environments that support your emotional well-being and authentic expression. So in terms of self-reflection, in terms of reflecting on your financial needs, you can ask, how do my family's attitudes about money and security influence my financial decisions today? What financial security do I need to feel emotionally safe, and how can I communicate these needs clearly? How does my emotional state affect my spending patterns, and what communication with myself do I need to do regarding money? To improve your idea of money, seeing it more as a thing that can help you do the things you want rather than something that's limited, but not in that whole, oh, I just think it and it comes way. Yes, we can think it and it will come, but we have to take practical actions too. In terms of our emotional needs, we can ask, what emotions have I been avoiding expressing, and how is this avoidance affecting my relationships and health? How do I communicate my emotional needs to others, and what family patterns am I unconsciously repeating? What would authentic emotional expression look like for me, even if it's not conventionally attractive or acceptable? In terms of your spiritual needs, how does my relationship with family patterns affect my spiritual growth and connection to divine feminine nurturing energies? What spiritual practices support my emotional authenticity rather than spiritual bypassing complicated feelings? How can I, create an environment within myself? What spiritual practices can I use to help heal my emotions and me running away from them and avoiding them and numbing myself to them? How can I communicate with the divine through my emotional experiences rather than despite them? So this can make us realize that emotions can be pathways to spiritual connection rather than obstacles. In terms of your psychological needs, you can ask yourself, what childhood communication patterns am I unconsciously repeating, and how do they serve or get in the way of my adult relationships? You can ask yourself, how do I balance emotional authenticity with emotional responsibility in my communications? What psychological healing do I need around family communication patterns, and how can I access appropriate support? In terms of your physical needs, how do my emotions affect my physical health, particularly my digestive system and stomach area? What physical practices support my emotional expression and processing rather than suppressing, getting in the way of my difficult, challenging feelings? How can I care for my body in ways that honour my emotional needs and family healing work? So as I wind down now, this Mercury retrograde and direct through Cancer and its nurturing waters offers us a rare gift, the opportunity to revolutionise how we communicate our deepest, most profound, mind-blowing, next level emotional truths and heal generational family patterns. The journey from a woman awaiting a sailboat to a clown making grimaces represents our evolution from passive emotional waiting to courageously expressing ourselves authentically, even when our feelings aren't conventionally pretty or acceptable. The challenges are real, family dramas may intensify, digestive issues could come up from emotional stress, and we might find ourselves taking communications far too personally, yet these challenges serve as invitations to develop stronger emotional intelligence, clearer boundaries, and more authentic ways of expressing our needs and feelings. The aspects supporting this transit bring both harmony and necessary structure routine to our emotional communications. And we have to remember, healing family communication patterns isn't about achieving perfect harmony. It's about developing the courage to be genuine yourself while remaining emotionally responsible to others. Trusting your gut feelings during this transit, literally and figuratively, and don't be afraid to express emotions that need expression, even if they're not socially comfortable. And our authentic emotional truth and shared wisdom and care has the power to heal not just our own communication patterns, but potentially they can influence our entire family system for generations to come. So yeah, that's the end of this very in-depth guide on Mercury retrograde from July the 18th to 11th of August 2025. I'm Amani, your holistic astrological karmic life coach. Take care, thanks for listening, and see you next time.